Hi everybody, and welcome to the training on Best Management Practices, Phytophthora and Weed Prevention. The purpose of this training is to provide general recommendations to prevent the introduction and spread of weed seeds and soil pathogens during construction and any activity that disturbs soil and intact vegetation. This map shows the areas of the East Bay and Park District lands that provide critical habitat for endangered species. As you can see, our East Bay Regional Parks are within or in close proximity to wildland that provides critical habitat for endangered and all other species. It's important that we protect the wildlife and plant communities while we work. Protecting and enhancing biological diversity is a key tool in our response to climate change. Biological diversity allows for ecosystems to be resilient to stressors such as climate change, allowing for species to persist and thrive. Invasive species and introduced soil pathogens are two very potent threats to the biological diversity of our parklands. On the left, you can see how an escaped artichoke led to hundreds of acres of infested grasslands. On the right, a pallid manzanita has been infected with a Phytophthora, a small pathogen that lives in the soil. Many activities can spread the seeds of invasive plants and soil pathogens. Using best management practices can reduce the introduction and spread of these threats to the health of our parklands. BMPs, or best management practices, are a set of practices that help you avoid and minimize negative effects of land management actions. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In this case, a few well-timed practices can save millions of dollars in damage, remediation, and/or the extinction of species. Because the BMPs for Phytophthora also work for weed seeds and other propagules, we focus on the Phytophthora BMPs because it takes care of both issues. Weed seeds are pretty simple to understand, but Phytophthora, or water mold, is more complex. So we'll focus on the life cycle and movement of this microscopic organism. Phytophthora have a very complex life cycle and have a few different methods of reproduction, which makes them very difficult to detect and remediate once an area is infected. They have some similarities to fungi, but are very different. The primary takeaways are that they are primarily found in the soil and require moisture to thrive and reproduce. Since they're soil-borne, a primary pathway for introduction and spread in the environment is by movement of soil and planting of nursery plants. The best management practices in this presentation are focused around these pathways. It is important to note that Phytophthora ramorum, the Phytophthora that causes sudden oak death, or SOD, is unusual in that it is airborne, and its primary vector is the California bay laurel. Studies indicate that Park Service equipment, such as trucks and tools, are the primary vector of pathogens and weeds. These primary pathways are dirty equipment, meaning equipment that's covered in soil and vegetative debris, from outside of the parks, bringing propagules in. Dirty equipment that moves soil and vegetative debris from site to site within our parks, and nursery plants that are not grown in phytosanitary conditions and planted in our parks. We are the solution! It all boils down to park hygiene. This should be considered every day for all equipment and every project. Starting our day with clean equipment like boots, tools, trucks, and construction equipment is a critical step in protecting our parklands. All vehicles, equipment, and boots must be clean before entering the project site. If the equipment is dirty but does not leave the site, it does not need to be cleaned at the start of the next day. Please clean your equipment before leaving the site. In most cases, cleaning your equipment thoroughly of visible soil and vegetation is sufficient. This can be accomplished through mechanical cleaning such as brushing, blowing, or hosing off debris. When you're working around certain sensitive species or known infection sites, additional sanitizing is imperative. However, this presentation does not cover these additional sanitizing methods. When you are considering your project site hygiene, please follow the list as best as possible. Do your best management practice field refresher and tailgate safety before doing any work. Clean your tools and equipment before leaving the site. Maintain any debris or soil on site. And use locally derived materials. So how do we know that mechanical cleaning is sufficient? To test the effectiveness of tool cleaning on the transmission of Phytophthora ramorum, A chainsaw and handsaws were contaminated with sudden oak death-infected wood chips and sawdust. The saws were treated by different methods in an attempt to decontaminate them, which included removing the visible organic matter with a wire brush or brushing followed by a disinfectant rinse. The disinfectants used were 10% ethanol, 5% bleach, and Lysol diluted as instructed on the label. After cleaning, the saws were examined under magnification, and any remaining bits of plant or organic matter were plated on selective agar petri dishes. The percentage of infectious propagules that grew on the agar plates is graphed in the graph you see on the screen. For best results, clean all visible organic residue, plant tissue, or soil from the tool. A wire or plastic brush is generally effective. Removal of all visible debris will eliminate 99% of all infectious propagules. Wash with a disinfectant that will kill any remaining spores. We've found that 70% ethanol, diluted bleach, and Lysol brand disinfectant are all effective. Here are some examples of mechanical cleaning tools. As a reminder, if you're working on a site with sensitive species or an area that's already infected, this is an example of some of the disinfection tools you might use. Another important practice is to avoid work when there's standing or puddling water on the project site. Remember, Phytophthora reproduce in wet conditions, making work in the winter riskier. In wet weather, there are more spores and it's much easier to spread mud around. As a summary of our best management practices, remember, absolute sanitation is impossible, but effective sanitation is entirely possible. All equipment, big and small, must be clean before entering the park. Brushing and blowing off dirt and debris is 99% effective. Infection and/or infestation risk increases with the amount of soil and vegetation you move. Avoid wet weather work if possible. Clean between your parks and projects. Whenever possible, stay on the trail. Reduce or eliminate the import and export of materials. Thanks for listening, and we hope this training has helped remind you of best management practices in our parklands.